and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Bangor on this, the 7th of August. I am Kaylee Grogan, and I am honored to be your worship associate this morning. Thanks to many modern miracles, our guest in the virtual pulpit this morning is my colleague and dear friend, Mike Pratt. Until very recently, Mike and I shared an office at Wheaton College in the Center for Social Justice and Community Impact, where Mike serves as the LGBTQ+ engagement coordinator. Not only is Mike an exceptional staff member at Wheaton, he is an actor and published author. Feel free to let me know if you want any more info about his book, Code of the Nightbird, which touches on some of the things Mike is going to be talking about today, but in a fictional narrative. Now I'll get us started this morning with some announcements. Some health and safety reminders here at UUSB. I see you are all in compliance as masks are still required in the building. You will notice that I am not wearing a mask, and that is because council has agreed that folks leading worship who are a safe distance from others may be unmasked for clarity of message. Additionally, singing is still not permitted in the congregation, so we have some nicely pre-recorded hymns this morning, and you are more than welcome to hum along here in the sanctuary. And an important reminder, if you didn't see it in the e-news, we will not be holding worship services for the next 2 Sundays, taking a little vacation August 14th and 21st. The worship committee is a small and mighty group that does incredible work to bring us worship services each Sunday. If you are interested in getting more involved in supporting the work that goes into making this happen every week, please feel free to reach out to myself or Lori Cartier about ways to get more involved. Some help and energy would be much appreciated. Even though we are not passing the plate right now, don't forget that you can still make donations to the basket over here by the door. In August, half of the undesignated offerings will go to the UUSB food security programs, like the weekly bean supper. And please remember, you can also go to our website and give online. This Tuesday at 7 p.m., Reverend Drew will hold his weekly fireside chats over Zoom. You can find that link in your e-news, along with the many more exciting announcements, including a social justice retreat and a faith linking in action meeting. Now I invite us all to sit back and enjoy this morning's introit prepared by Lainey Thomas. I now invite Rebecca Ames to come forward and light our chalice as we join in reciting in unison this morning's chalice lighting written by Eric Walker Wickstrom. Here today, in this place and with these people, may we listen so that we can hear. May we hear so that we can feel. May we feel so that we can know. And may we know so that we can change ourselves and this world. May this chalice we light our way. Thank you. Both of our hymns this morning were prepared by Jess Hooterman on her YouTube channel. So many thanks to Jess. And now I invite you to join in humming or singing if you're at home, our opening hymn number 389, Gathered Here.
Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, spirits draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in the mystery of the body, gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in the mystery of the body, gathered here in the struggles and the body, gathered here in the struggle of the power, gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in the mysteries of the body, gathered here in the struggles and the body, gathered here in the struggle of the power, Spirit, draw near.
Blessed be. And we're really putting our technology and new sound system to work as I present to you another video for our Story for All Ages. This is a story Mike and I actually discovered together. It was part of a exhibit at Wheaton College on, the exhibit was called Freedom is a Constant Struggle, and it was focused on the situations for people dealing with incarceration. And this was a lovely children's story that speaks to the assumptions we make about people and keeping our hearts open to one another. Please enjoy.
Milo Imagines the World. Words by Newbery Medal-winning author Matt De La Peña. Pictures by Caldecott Honor-winning illustrator Christian Robinson. What begins as a slow, distant glow grows and glows into a tired train that clatters down the tracks. A cool rush of wind quiets into a screech of steel. And when the doors slide open, Milo slips aboard. The train bucks back into motion as he and his sister squeeze onto bench seats. The whiskered man beside Milo has a face of concentration. A businessman has a blank, lonely face. The wedding-dressed woman near the far door has a face made out of light, while the dog peeking out of her handbag has no face at all, just a long, lolling tongue. These monthly Sunday subway rides are never ending, and as usual, Milo is a shook-up soda. Excitement stacked on top of worry, on top of confusion, on top of love. To keep himself from bursting, he studies the faces around him and makes pictures of their lives. At a downtown local stop, the whiskered man folds up his crossword and hurries off the train. Milo imagines him trudging through brown mounds of slush. It's a 5-foot climb to his cluttered apartment, where he's greeted by mewling cats and burrowing rats. Parakeets tweet songs of longing as the man sips tepid soup, hunched over a game of solitaire. Late that night, the door to the parakeet cage mysteriously falls open, and the cats gather on the cold sill to watch the birds fly free above the city. Milo tugs his sister's sleeve and holds up his picture, but even when she turns to look, he can tell she doesn't see. She's a shook-up soda, too. A boy in a suit boards the train with his dad. His hair is a perfect part, and there's not a single scruff on his bright white Nikes. Milo imagines the clop, clop, clop of the horse-drawn carriage that will carry him to his castle. Imagines the clink, clink, clink of the guards slowly lowering the drawbridge. Across the human-made moat, the boy is met by a butler, 2 maids, and a gourmet chef offering crust-free sandwich squares. Milo flips to a fresh page at a bustling midtown stop. When the wedding-dressed woman strides off the train, a band of street performers launches into Here Comes the Bride, and everyone on the platform stops and cheers. Milo imagines the grand cathedral ceremony where the couple will be pronounced husband and wife. Imagines the groom whisking his new bride to an awaiting hot air balloon, where the pilot loads them in with blankets and blasts the heat. And up, up, up they go, hand in hand, beyond the concrete walls of the city into the infinite blue. Milo holds up this picture too, but his sister shoos him away. Can't you see I'm playing my game? He watches her thumbs bang around her smudged screen, then turns back to the boy in the suit. They lock eyes for a few long seconds, and suddenly, it feels like the walls are closing in around Milo. The spell is broken when a crew of breakers bound onto the train, announcing, "You all ready for a show?" Several curious faces look up as the beat drops, and now the girls are walking up the walls. They're twirling around poles, they're backflipping over shopping bags. When the train pulls into the next stop, they collect a few dollars and scramble for another car. Milo imagines them going from train to train, doing their act as everyone watches. But even after the performances are over, faces still follow their every move when they walk down the electronic aisle at the department store. When they cross into the fancy neighborhood, Milo doesn't really like this picture, so he puts away his pad and turns his reflection to the window. What do people imagine about his face? Can they see him reciting his volcano poem to the class? Can they hear his mom's soothing voice reading him a bedtime book over the phone? Can they smell the chile colorado bubbling in a pot in his auntie's apartment near the cemetery? Butterflies flood Milo's stomach when it's finally their stop. He follows his sister onto the cold station platform and up the stairs. Above ground, he's surprised to see the boy in the suit a few paces ahead. He's even more surprised when the boy joins the long line to pass through the metal detector. Milo's sister suddenly bends to give him a hug. "I didn't mean to snap at you," she says. She takes his hand, adding, "You have your picture ready?" He nods, feeling the warmth of her fingers. As they slowly shuffle forward, Milo studies the boy in the suit, his dad rubbing his thin shoulders, and a thought occurs to him. Maybe you can't really know anyone just by looking at their face. Milo tries to reimagine all the pictures he made on the train. Maybe he could have done it like this instead. Or this. Or this. Milo's chest fills with excitement when he spots his mom through the crowd. His sister rushes to give her a hug before pulling Milo in too. And it's in this tight tangle of familiar arms that he feels most alive. When they separate, Milo flips through his pad until he finds the right picture. "I made this for you," he says, holding it up, and he watches for the smile he hopes will spread across his mom's face. Thank you so much for reading Milo Imagines the World with me. I hope you really enjoyed it. I hope this book also encourages you to imagine your world in many different ways. Till next time, bye-bye.
Now is the time in our service when we open our hearts to one another for the sharing of joys and sorrows. If you have a joyful life milestone or a sorrow or concern to share, you can type that into the chat box over Zoom and I will read it out, or here in the sanctuary, you can come up to the microphone and Sue will make sure you get a candle to light. Seeing no more candles and no more in the chat, I will ask Sue to light one final candle for those joys and sorrows that remain in our hearts unspoken, and for those without a community in which to share. Blessed be, and amen. Lainey will now provide us with a musical interlude, Spirit of Life. You. Now, before we move on to our guest speaker, I want to mention that we have a small but mighty group here in the sanctuary. We have quite a number. We have 24 boxes on the Zoom, and while some of those are us here in the sanctuary also logged in, many of those I know are more than one person behind their box, like my parents who are logged in online. So welcome, and I'm so glad we can use technology so we can all enjoy the service from wherever we are, and we can enjoy the talents and gifts of some people who would not be able to be here were it not for this technology, like our guest speaker today. I am excited to bring to you now from Pawtucket, Rhode Island, my good friend Mike Pratt. You'll hear more about him from him, but let me just say that Mike is a tireless advocate for justice and equity, not only for the LGBTQ+ community, but across the board. I am honored to have worked with him for as long as I did, and delighted he agreed to speak with us today, not just about the importance of queer allyship and advocacy, but also on some of his own spiritual journey and how it's all connected. So I will let Mike take it away.
Hi everyone, my name is Mike Pratt and I am truly honored to be with you all this morning. I serve as the LGBTQ+ engagement coordinator with the Center for Social Justice and Community Impact, as well as the Healthy Masculinity coordinator with the Sexual Misconduct and Assault Resource Team, both at Wheaton College. I'm also an actor and an author, as Kaylee very generously included in the newsletter bio. And while you may not know me, I feel like I've gotten to know many of you through the stories that Kaylee has shared with me during the 5 years that we worked together at Wheaton College. I even sat in on a sermon that she delivered one time and was truly moved by the words shared by the congregation and the inclusion of a Joni Mitchell song in addition to a traditional hymn. It wasn't what I was expecting in the best possible way. Even still, When Kaylee asked me if I'd be interested in speaking at a service over the summer, I have to admit that I was more than a little apprehensive to accept the invitation. And the reason for this was twofold. One, I know how sacred this space and all of you are to her, and so I felt an enormous responsibility to live up to some kind of expectation. And two, frankly, I am profoundly uncomfortable being in religious spaces as a gay person, at least typically. While there are many religious queer people and queer people who would like greater acceptance in their chosen faith practices, religious trauma and queer identity seem to be so intricately connected that one can't be shared in a forum such as this without referencing the other. Personally, other than tarot cards, some complicated feelings about the afterlife, and a degree from Stonehill College, a traditionally Catholic institution, I have no real connection to religion and no expertise, certainly, on the subject. I am probably the most unqualified person that Kaylee could have asked to speak today. So then, why am I here? Well, one thing that I do believe in very deeply, in fact, is the power of empathy and storytelling in the process of healing from trauma and better understanding others. And this I very much do have some expertise in. Much like the warm surprise that your inclusion of Both Sides Now was for me, I've had many experiences that have revealed some preconceived notions that I held once about spiritually or religiously aligned folks. While it was challenging, being one of the few out students at Stonehill even just a few years back, it was also where I really developed a passion for gender and sexuality studies. And not only that, but where I realized the importance of that education on the lives of all of us. When I later went for my interview at Wheaton, I remember pausing in front of the chapel, which would eventually become my favorite building on campus, because I was certain that LGBTQ plus engagement work would have to be housed somewhere else. It couldn't be in a chapel. Surely I was given the wrong location. I wasn't. And then I met Kaylee and her cohort of religious and spiritual life students, staff, and faculty members, and was once again frightened and apprehensive. Much to my surprise, however, they became some of the most vocal and successful advocates for queer students on campus. In particular, I think of two older faculty members who continue to display active allyship skills, working on gender policy review and restroom audits on campus to improve accessibility for trans and non-binary community members. And I think that that is what is the important takeaway from those happy moments of surprise, though. They're not passive moments. In fact, they're investigative and sometimes even challenging for those who haven't had the opportunity to learn about what accessibility for LGBTQ plus people might look like in that context, for instance. They're moments that acknowledge hurt and seek to build towards something more inclusive. That being said, the pang of fear that sometimes creeps up when a queer person encounters a religious space is not unwarranted. I have spoken with students at Wheaton who have shared personal experiences with conversion therapy, which seems like an impossibility in Massachusetts, but it's most certainly the reality for so many. Just recently, I was on a film set and spoke with another gay man about my age, originally from Maryland, who knew several peers that were forced into church-sanctioned ex-gay ministries. He himself talked about continuing to struggle with loving God while simultaneously worrying that that love was not reciprocated. I still worry they're right sometimes, he said to me, about the near constant fear of an eternity in hell. And that's a hard thing to grapple with, to put it extremely mildly. Something Kaylee and I have talked about in our workshops is the fact that while conversion therapy for minors is banned in 20 states, as well as DC, it's legal for adults in all 50 states. And certainly those over the age of 18 can be coerced. And as my Wheaton student example shows, even in states where a ban is in effect, that doesn't mean the ban is always upheld. And sometimes it's broken by a young queer person who feels like conversion therapy or ex-gay ministry is the only way to survive and maintain their community. And while it might be easy to have a knee-jerk reaction that criticizes a person for making this decision, it's sort of like criticizing someone in an abusive relationship for not leaving or not leaving soon enough. It's not easy to leave a community. especially if it feels central to your identity and perhaps in conflict with another part of that identity. You might ask yourself what this community means to you and how hard it might be to leave, even if on the other side of that decision was greater freedom. That survival, though, comes at a significant mental and sometimes physical cost, as many of the methods employed within these programs have been debunked as torture by the International Rehabilitation Council for Torture Victims and debunked as harmful pseudoscience by every reputable medical practice. These methods include aversion therapy, electroconvulsive therapy, non-consensual psychotropic drug use, exorcism, solitary confinement, force feeding or food deprivation, and peer pressure. I remain empathetic, however, toward those who have never had the opportunity to learn about queerness in a formal setting, whether that be educational or professional or even pastoral. That is a major privilege of working in higher education for sure. During our introductory allyship workshop, we begin by asking participants to reflect on the first time they remember learning about LGBTQ+ people. Maybe this is something that you can do on your ride home tonight or even at dinner. Without fail, participants sort of become very shy because they're afraid to say that their first interactions were through negative teachings, sometimes by a family member, maybe the media, and lots of times by religious institutions. My own first impressions were negative. I remember wanting to find something that would counter the religious weight that I associated with being gay before claiming that identity as my own, and so I sought solace where I often do, being in movies. And being a discerning viewer, I had my standards and selected Brokeback Mountain and Philadelphia, both objectively good films, but the worst possible messaging for me to hear at that time, because what those films told me was that being gay meant either I would get AIDS and die, and if I didn't get AIDS and die, that I would live a life in secret and then die of physical violence. And while these narratives are important, they also help to justify a lot of the negatives that I hear repeated in the classroom all too frequently. Without a moment of interruption, those perspectives can go unchecked. And my own moment of interruption actually, again, came at an unlikely location. Something else about me is that I love Stevie Nicks. She is probably as close to a spiritual guide as I have, which I do not mean in a flippant way and certainly not to offend in this space. It is a sincere statement. I saw her in concert when I was still deeply closeted, and I didn't know at the time that she had a significant gay following. I went to the concert, and it was the first time that I remember seeing gay couples holding hands and people dressed in drag as Stevie, and it blew my mind because these people were not in imminent danger. And that's what I was told being gay was, constant and ever-present danger. But they were just enjoying a concert, and I didn't know that that was what it meant to be gay also. And I share that reflection with participants and now all of you because it's not just straight and cisgender allies who sometimes need to unlearn or engage differently in order to disrupt trauma. That responsibility is shared, certainly when it comes to conversations about sexual orientation and gender identity, but it's also true for other marginalized identities. The sort of dirty secret with the first impressions activity is that systemic discrimination also means that internalized oppression is a significant factor to consider. So then, what does this mean moving forward and healing from trauma, or helping in the process of healing for beloved community members? It's a great question. And while the process itself is hard and sometimes takes a lifetime, identifying the steps is a little bit easier. Acknowledgement is a great first step and can mean something different depending on your situation. Maybe this is acknowledging past harm that you've caused or past harm caused by institutions that are central to your identity. This could be acknowledging religious trauma, perhaps, or even systemic issues within your chosen field. That chapel building that I mentioned as being my favorite on campus, for example, was named after a past president of Wheaton, Reverend Samuel Valentine Cole, who denied the application of Portia Washington Pittman, Booker T. Washington's daughter, because in his view, it would have been too much of a disruption to the white students to begin the process of integrating the dorm rooms. That just was not a precedent that he wanted to set. To say that that piece of history is not related directly to continued racism that BIPOC students face within higher education and on Wheaton's campus would be to refuse an acknowledgement that could begin to lead to some degree of healing. Steps 2 and 3 would be to keep the reflections that arise from that acknowledgement and allow them to lead to a commitment to education and active allyship, which again will look different potentially for everybody here today. I am moved that I was asked to be here, but I hope this is not the last time a conversation about queerness happens on a Sunday in Bangor. Perhaps looking at how the needs of the local LGBTQ+ community may intersect with the mission of the church might allow for some meaningful relationship building and engagement opportunities in the future. Listening to queer members of the congregation who are willing and interested in sharing stories too can be a meaningful step toward progress. Remembering, however, that asking someone to share their story involves a level of vulnerability that then requires active listening and reflection to properly honor. We all have our scopes of influence, so I recommend taking some time to investigate them in an open and healthy way. I like to journal. That might work for you. That might be a helpful avenue, but conversation and positive accountability can be equally useful. You have a beautiful community here, and maintaining that could be the most meaningful work that you ever do. And it is work. Don't underestimate the power of conversation and community. While I'm personally not religious, I can see that both of those are central to a deeply held spirituality. And while I personally might not be as cool as Stevie Nicks, I encourage you to use this moment as a moment of interruption like that concert experience was for me. One where you are given permission to begin to contribute to honoring those around you by lifting them up and listening to them to a space of better understanding. I want to thank you so much for allowing me to be here today and take up this time and this space, and encourage you to please feel free to reach out to continue this conversation, and sincerely hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And if anyone wants to take Mike up on his offer of continuing that conversation, feel free to let me know, and I am happy to put you in touch with him. As we let those words digest and sink in, please enjoy today's special music brought to you again by Lainey. Now, once more on your screen, we bring you Mike with this morning's reading.
Surprise! This is pre-recorded. I'm sorry to break the illusion. I am coming to you now from a different room with air conditioning in my house and dry hair, and finally a reading which I struggled with a little bit, and Kaylee very generously helped me identify a reading that would speak to the topic I wanted to address, but that was also grounded in the UU faith, because at the end of the day, that is why we are here, in particular why you are all there today. So I thank you for listening to my longer speech and taking my side of things seriously, and I wanted to make sure that that was reciprocated. Partly because, in addition to queerness, there are a number of different identities that have been impacted by religious trauma, and unfortunately we're seeing that playing out quite a bit in current events right now, from legislation that is looking to control the bodies of certain people in the United States and their ability to seek certain medical care, and sort of the list never ends. And so I wanted to find something that sort of talked about the intersection of spirituality and different identities, in particular identities that are connected to the physical body or sexuality. And so Kaylee very kindly suggested for me Sex and Spirit by Robin Tanner. Robin Tanner is a Unitarian Universalist minister, poet, and activist. Without further ado, this is Sex and Spirit. Desire and sexuality are not held in high regard by many of the world's religious traditions today, and sex, well, don't even go there. As extremism rises, desires are seen as objects of suppression, while bodies become things to control. The Greeks first articulated this idea of separation of the spirit and body. Drawing on Greek philosophy, today's religious fundamentalism fuses disembodied theologies with purist politics. But let's be clear. At the core of this body and spirit separation is a deeper distrust of humanity. It hasn't always been this way. Many of the world's religions have strong mystical traditions with beautiful imagery, poetry, and teachings about the holy erotic. Consider Rumi, a Sufi poet in the Islamic tradition who writes of the experience of God as lovers in rapture. Or Teresa of Avila, who recounted ecstatic experiences in prayer. Or, for goodness sakes, the Kama Sutra, which is, let's not forget, a Hindu text. For all the few verses that have been picked out and smacked on signs and waved in front of reproductive health clinics, the overwhelming message of the world's religions is one of embodied love. I mean Jesus, I am not swearing here. In the Gospels, Jesus became human in body. Bodies are the vehicles for sacredness. Each neuron firing and forming communicates divinity, from the skin tingles of attraction to the electricity of orgasm. Desire, longing, and yearning is a form of prayer or sacred communication. The word desire comes from the Latin desidere, or from the stars. We believe its etymology traces to a common phrase in the early 13th century. If someone was seeking direction in their life or guidance, they might be instructed to await what the stars will bring, or to follow desire. Those offering this advice couldn't have known that all of life, including humans, are at least at an atomic level stardust. Joni Mitchell reference, potentially. In some sense, then, our desires are not base or less than the spiritual, and certainly not separate, but rather of the celestial. If we long to develop the depths of our spirituality, then we must all embrace and understand the depths of our sexuality. Amen to that.
Indeed. On that note, I invite you to hum along to one of my favorite hymns, We Are a Gentle, Angry People. We will be doing 3 verses that you should be seeing on the screen. Which ones?
We are a gentle, angry people. are singing, singing for our lives. We are a justice-seeking people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are queer and straight together, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are queer and straight together, and we are singing, singing for our lives.
As I invite Rebecca back to extinguish our chalice, if she would be so kind, let me share with you these closing words from Deborah Hoffner. As we enter another week of uncertainty in the world, let us remember that there is only one side, that of humanity and the planet Earth. May we pray for peace. May we raise our voices with our elected officials and engage as we can in acts of resistance. And may we remember to take good care of ourselves, each other, and those we love. May we remember these words adapted from the Unity Prayer. The light of love surrounds us. Love enfolds us. The power of love protects us. Love watches over us. Wherever we are, love is. I invite you now to rise as we enjoy our musical benediction.
Let us go forth into the week ahead, striving to be faithful to our life's journeys, serving the needs of the earth and its inhabitants, sharing in the spirit of love with all we say and do, sharing in the spirit of love with all we say and do, sharing in the spirit of love with all we say and do. Blessed be, blessed be, blessed, blessed be.
Huge thank you to our worship team, Mike Pratt, our guest, Sue McKay, logistics coordinators, and our tech team running new tech and making all of our lives easier in the long run. So thank you so much and have a great week.